Getty. CETA is a trade deal between the EU and Canada. The warning comes as the UK points to the bloc's comprehensive and economic trade agreement CETA deal as a potential blueprint for a future deal with Canada post-Brexit, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying he is ready and waiting to trade freely with the UK. But Thilo Bode, executive director of Foodwatch International, said Germans do not support CETA because rather than serving the general interest, it serves the interests of large corporations. He said the EU's trade agreements must be reformed, otherwise public resentment toward the EU will only deepen, and no one, regardless of the views on trade, will benefit if that happens. What is CETA? Getty. Thousands have protested against the UK-Canada CETA deal. The EU's trade agreements must be reformed, otherwise public resentment toward the EU will only deepen. Thilo Bode, executive director of Foodwatch International. Mr. Bode warned the European Commission's planned free trade deals with Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay, Mexico, Indonesia, Japan and Vietnam undermine important global agreements reached by the economic community. Mr. Bode, writing for Politico, said these agreements would cover not only market access issues, such as an increase in Brazilian meat exports to the EU, but also the harmonization of regulations for consumer, environmental and health protection. The precautionary principle enshrined in the EU law should play a decisive role here. This principle holds that, in the absence of scientific consensus about the risks of a product or process, policymakers can delay or suspend its approval until there is sound evidence of its safety. The Commission failed to unambiguously incorporate this principle into its deal with Canada and continues to neglect it in agreements that are currently on the negotiating table. 2 September 19, 2017. Theresa May talking with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in his office on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. This apparent phase-out of the precaution-based approach is also evident in the environmental risks that are being tolerated under the agreements. Mr. Bode accused the EU of shirking its responsibility when it comes to being transparent about trade deals. He said, behind all the rhetoric, the Commission's planned trade deals undermine important global agreements reached by the international community. The Commission should turn to independent studies to investigate the agreement's impacts and avoid potential negative effects. Getty. The EU is pushing to secure other trade deals with countries. In many cases, impact assessments of this kind are either never conducted or, as with the Japan agreement, kept suspiciously under wraps. He also raised concerns new trade deals, like CETA and TTIP, could undermine the bloc's democratic principles. Mr. Bode said committees to be established under the agreements would have the power to amend the provisions of a deal without adequate democratic control. The issue of insufficient democratic legitimacy has also taken center stage in the pending constitutional complaint against CETA in Germany and will most likely be subject to review by the European Court of Justice. Overall, the EU seems to view democratic processes as irritating impediments to be overcome, much like trade barriers. Meanwhile, the EU is planning to split future agreements into unionly and mixed parts to get around the tedious ratification process of CETA. Mr. Bode said EU members would not be given the chance to vote on aspects of the free trade agreements that are within the EU's exclusive competence, including provisions on standards for consumer, environmental and health protection, in spite of the fact that these matters would have a direct impact on the daily lives of European citizens. CETA is a trade deal between Canada and the European Union. The deal came into effect on September 21 and will eliminate tariffs on 98% of products traveling between the two parties, a move the EU claims will save Canadian businesses €590 million every year. Unlike other deals with non-EU nations, Canada does not have to pay into the bloc's coffers or accept free movement of people, but the deal is far from a comprehensive free trade agreement. There are hundreds of items that are not covered by the policy, including eggs and chicken. Canada's arrangement with the EU means it trades without any tariffs except in farming, and even then the tariffs are low.